The morning mist clung to Winterfell's towers like funeral shrouds, and 9-year-old Arya Stark pressed her face against the frost-covered glass of her chamber window, watching her father's entourage prepare for what would become the most consequential journey in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. In another world, in another story, she would be among those horses bound for King's Landing, and a destiny written in blood, betrayal, and the faces of the dead. But in this world, her mother's firm hand had settled the matter the night before, with words that carried the weight of prophecy. "You'll stay," Catelyn had said, her voice brooking no argument, her fingers unconsciously tracing the edge of a letter that bore disturbing news from the south. "Bran needs you. Winterfell needs you. Robb will need your eyes and ears while he learns to rule. Sometimes the greatest battles are fought at home, and sometimes the smallest wolves must guard the largest secrets." Arya had argued, of course, with the fierce independence that defined her very soul. She had pleaded, bargained, even threatened to run away and follow them on foot. But something in her mother's eyes, a flicker of fear disguised as maternal certainty, a shadow of knowledge, that spoke of ravens bearing dark tidings, made her finally nod in reluctant acceptance. Later she would understand that Catelyn Stark possessed the gift of sight that comes to mothers in the darkest hours, though she called it nothing more than intuition. So Arya watched her father ride away with Sansa, their figures growing smaller, against the grey sky, until they disappeared into the morning fog that seemed to swallow them like hungry ghosts. She didn't know she was watching the last peaceful moment of her childhood fade with them, or that the Game of Thrones was already being played in the shadows around her, with pieces she couldn't yet see and stakes she couldn't yet comprehend. These days that followed were strange, filled with a tension that even young Arya could feel pressing against the ancient stones of Winterfell like a physical weight. Bran climbed higher and stayed out longer, as if trying to see beyond the horizon, to where their father had gone. Robb aged years in days, his boyish laughter replaced by the careful words and measured steps of a lord-in-waiting. And Arya found herself drawn more and more to the Godswood, where the Hearttree's face seemed to watch her with knowing eyes. That night, on her 10th day of watching and waiting, the assassin came for Bran. Arya had been in the Godswood practicing, her letters by moonlight, because even rebels must sometimes pretend to be proper ladies, when her mother's scream cut through the darkness like a blade through silk. The sound was primal, desperate, the cry of a she-wolf protecting her cub, and it sent ice through Arya's veins and fire into her legs. She ran through corridors she knew better than her own heartbeat, bare feet, silent on stones, worn smooth by centuries of Stark footsteps, guided by instincts she didn't know she possessed. By the time she reached Bran's tower chamber, her lungs burning from the sprint up the winding stairs, the tableau before her was one that would haunt her dreams for years to come. The killer was thin and desperate, smelling of horses and fear and the particular stench that comes from sleeping. Rough on the roads, his blade caught the moonlight streaming through Bran's window, beautiful and deadly, Valyrian steel too fine for a cutthroat's calloused hand. Catelyn knelt beside Bran's bed, her own hands bloody from trying to grab the assassin's wrist, the dagger's edge hovering just inches from her throat. Arya moved without thinking, the way Jon had taught her when they played at swords in the yard, the way Syrio Forel might have if he had been there to see. She picked up the heavy brass candlestick from Bran's reading desk, the one carved with wolves and winter roses, and brought it down on the assassin's skull with all the strength her small but determined body could muster. The impact sent vibrations up her arms, a sensation she would remember for the rest of her life. The man crumpled to the floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Blood spread across the ancient stones in patterns that looked almost like writing in the moonlight, and Arya found herself staring at it with a fascination that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. Catelyn pulled her daughter close, both of them shaking from shock and adrenaline, while Bran slept on, untouched by the violence that had almost claimed him, protected by dreams of climbing and flying. "Who sent you?" Catelyn whispered to the dying man, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. His answer was nothing but blood and silence, but his eyes held something else, surprise, as if he hadn't expected to find wolves with such sharp teeth in their own den. The dagger told its own story when dawn came, and Maester Luwin examined it with the careful attention of a man who understood that weapons, like words, carried meaning beyond their immediate purpose. Valyrian steel, with a dragon-bone hilt carved in the shape of a snarling wolf's head, the craftsmanship so exquisite it could only have belonged to a lord or prince. According to Sir Roderick, who had served in wars across the Seven Kingdoms, it was Tyrion Lannister's blade, recognized from tournaments and feasts where such weapons were displayed like trophies. But the pieces formed a puzzle that made no sense by the normal rules of the world. Why would the imp, clever and cynical but never known for casual cruelty, want to kill a crippled boy who had never done him harm? What could Bran possibly know or have seen that would make him a threat to anyone? The questions multiplied like ravens in winter, each one bringing darker possibilities. "There are lies within lies here," Catelyn said the next morning, turning the blade over in her hands as if its steel could reveal secrets. "Wheels within wheels, and games being played that we don't understand. But I mean to find the truth, whatever it costs, wherever it leads." She made her decision then, one that would change not just her own fate, but the fate of kingdoms. If she was riding south to follow this bloody thread to its source, to find the hand that had guided this blade toward her son's heart, she would not go alone. She would take the daughter who moved like shadow and saw what others missed, who had just proved that she could think quickly and act decisively when lives hung in the balance. "Pack light, but pack smart," she told Arya. "We ride before dawn, and we ride hard. The game has already begun, and we're behind." And so Arya found herself on the road after all, but not as she had ever imagined in her wildest dreams of adventure. She rode beside her mother not as a burden or an afterthought, but as an ally, a small wolf learning that the world beyond Winterfell's protective walls was far more dangerous and complex than any of Old Nan's stories had suggested. The King's Road stretched before them like a stone river flowing through a landscape of possibilities, each mile carrying them further from the certainties of home and deeper into a web of intrigue that already had blood on its strands. Catelyn had brought a small but carefully chosen party. Sir Roderick Cassel, gruff and loyal, whose sword had served House Stark for decades, 4 of her father's most trusted men-at-arms from Riverrun, whose loyalty to House Tully ran deeper than gold or fear, and now Arya, whose presence changed the dynamic of their mission in ways none of them fully understood yet. They travelled, fast but not recklessly, stopping at inns and crossroads to gather information, to listen to the gossip of merchants and soldiers and common folk who saw things that lords and ladies missed. At each stop, Arya learned lessons that no scepter had ever taught her. She learned to listen with her mouth shut, which for her was like wearing a stranger's face, though she didn't yet know the prophetic nature of that thought. She learned to watch the ways people's eyes moved when they spoke, to notice who looked away and who leaned closer, to recognize the difference between truth and the kind of lies that people told themselves as much as others. Most importantly, she learned that information was a kind of currency, and that the right question asked of the right person could be worth more than gold. The countryside they passed through told its own story of a realm under stress. Burned villages spoke of bandits growing bolder as royal authority weakened. Refugees on the roads carried tales of lordlings raising armies and old alliances cracking under new pressures. And everywhere, the talk was of the king's health failing and the prince's cruelty growing. of a kingdom that was already fracturing, even though most people didn't realize it yet. At the Crossroads Inn, where the great roads of Westeros met like the spokes of a wheel, Catelyn made her move with the precision of a master chess player positioning pieces for a decisive strike. The inn was crowded with travelers from every corner of the realm, and Catelyn had spotted something or someone that changed her plans entirely. Tyrion Lannister sat by the fire, alone except for his guards, drinking wine and reading a book as if he hadn't a care in the world. Arya watched her mother transform before her eyes from the careful, protective parent she had known into someone else entirely, a daughter of House Tully, a player in the great game, a woman who understood that sometimes mercy was a luxury that good people couldn't afford. When Catelyn called upon her father's bannermen to take Tyrion prisoner, when swords were drawn and the inn fell silent with tension, Arya felt something shift inside her own chest. This was what power looked like when it moved in the world. This was how the game was really played. "In the name of King Robert and the good lords you serve," Catelyn said, her voice carrying the authority of generations, "I call upon you to seize the imp, Tyrion Lannister, and hold him for the king's justice." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Too many lords owed too much to House Tully to refuse, and Tyrion found himself surrounded by drawn steel before he could so much as set down his wine cup. But Arya was watching Tyrion's face during the confrontation, and what she saw there surprised her. Not fear, though he certainly felt that, and not rage, though that was there too. What she saw was interest, calculation, and something that might have been respect. This was a man who appreciated a well-played move, even when it was played against him. The journey to the Vale was an education in itself, winding through mountain passes where the air grew thin and the world seemed to drop away on either side. Like a painter's attempt to capture infinity, Arya had never been so high above the world before, and the experience was both terrifying and exhilarating. But more than the physical journey, it was the conversations along the way that truly changed her understanding of how the world worked. Tyrion Lannister, she discovered, was nothing like what she had expected from the stories. Yes, he was small and twisted, marked by the gods in ways that made people uncomfortable. But his mind was sharp as Valyrian steel, his tongue even sharper, and his understanding of human nature was so precise it was almost frightening. Even as their prisoner, he managed to turn every conversation into a lesson, every jest into a weapon, every silence into a question that demanded an answer. "Tell me, little wolf," he said to Arya during one of their evening camps, while Catelyn was speaking privately with Ser Roderick about their route, "what do you think your mother hopes to accomplish by taking me to your mad aunt? What endgame does she see that justifies this risk?" Arya considered the question carefully, the way her father had taught her to think before speaking. "She thinks you tried to kill my brother. She wants to know why." "But you don't think I did it," Tyrion observed, his mismatched eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through to her bones. "No," Arya admitted. "You're clever enough to hire someone better if you wanted Bran dead, and cruel enough to make sure he suffered if you had reason to hate him. But you don't have reason, and you don't waste effort on pointless cruelty." Tyrion's laugh was genuine, delighted. "Very good. Yes, exactly right. I am both more and less terrible than my reputation suggests. But if not me, then who? And more importantly, why does someone want your mother to think it was me?" That question haunted Arya all the way to the Eyrie, even as the ancient castle rose before them like something from a fever dream, perched impossibly on its mountain peak with nothing but sky and eagles for company. The Sky Castle, men called it, and now she understood why. It seemed to float above the world, beautiful and terrible, and completely removed from earthly concerns. Her Aunt Lisa had changed since Arya had last seen her, years ago when the world was simpler and family visits were just family visits instead of desperate political maneuvers. The woman who greeted them in the high hall was brittle as old parchment. Her beauty faded into something sharp and nervous. Her son Robin, who should have been a strong boy nearing manhood, instead clung to his mother's skirts and stared at visitors with the wide, unfocused eyes of someone much younger. But while Catelyn negotiated with her sister and Tyrion faced the mockery of a trial by combat, Arya did what she had always done best. She explored. The Eyrie was ancient even by Westerosi standards, its stones laid by builders who understood that a castle in the clouds needed secrets built into its very bones. And Arya, who had spent her childhood finding hidden places in Winterfell, was uniquely equipped to discover those secrets. She found passages that servants used to move unseen through the castle. She found chambers where ravens roosted, their legs bearing messages to and from places that her aunt officially claimed not to know or care about. She found rooms where ledgers recorded debts and favors and promises, where the simple act of reading could reveal the shape of conspiracies that stretched across continents. And in one particular room, hidden behind a tapestry that depicted the Arryn falcon soaring over mountain peaks, she found the list that would change everything she thought she knew about loyalty and power and the price of crowns. It was written in her aunt's careful, feminine handwriting, page after page of names and numbers that at first seemed like nothing more than household accounts. But as Arya read more carefully, studying the entries with the same attention her father gave to important letters, the true significance became clear. These were not records of grain purchases or servant wages. These were contracts written in blood and sealed with ambition. Lords throughout the Seven Kingdoms had pledged their support to various claimants to the Iron Throne, each with a price carefully noted beside their signature in Lysa Arryn's precise hand. Some wanted gold, others wanted lands or titles or the deaths of their enemies. Some had signed their names to multiple contracts, playing all sides against each other with the cynical calculation of merchants in a marketplace. All of them were willing to trade loyalty like coins, to buy and sell the fates of kingdoms for personal advantage. House Frey would support whoever paid them most, but was already leaning toward the Lannisters. House Bolton would betray the Starks for the promise of Winterfell itself. House Karstark could be turned against Robb for the right combination of gold and revenge. The names went on and on, a catalogue of treachery that made Arya's blood run cold with its implications. But it was the final page that truly stopped her heart. There, in her aunt's careful script, was a detailed plan for the assassination of Eddard Stark, to be carried out during his time as Hand of the King. The method, poison in his wine, administered by a trusted servant already in Lannister pay. The timing, the feast celebrating Prince Joffrey's name day. The price, forgiveness of the crown's debts to the Iron Bank of Braavos, and Lysa Arryn's hand in marriage to whoever claimed the throne afterward. Arya memorized every word with the desperate intensity of someone trying to save a life. She had learned from old Nan that memory was the strongest castle of all, its walls built from attention and repetition and the kind of fear that burned everything into your mind like fire into wood. By the time Tyrion won his freedom through Bronze Swordarm and her mother prepared to return north, Arya could recite the entire list without missing a name, number, or detail. When Catelyn announced their departure, Arya made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. It was a choice that would echo through the rest of her life, determining not just her own fate, but the fate of everyone she loved. "I'm going to King's Landing," she announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. "Absolutely not," Catelyn replied immediately, her maternal instincts overruling her political calculations. "Mother, listen to me. Arya's voice carried a new authority, aged beyond her years by the weight of terrible knowledge. Father is walking into a trap. These names, these contracts, this whole conspiracy, it's a web being woven around him, and he doesn't know it exists. Someone needs to warn him, and it can't be you. You're too important, too visible. If you suddenly appeared in King's Landing, it would tell everyone that something was wrong. But I'm just a child. No one watches children closely enough to see them coming. It was Tyrion who spoke the words that decided everything, his clever mind already seeing possibilities that others missed. "The girl has a point that's sharper than most swords," he said, studying Arya with newfound respect, "and I find myself curious about what a young wolf might accomplish in the capital. The game there is played with subtlety and misdirection, skills that require intelligence rather than strength. I could use an ally who thinks as clearly as she does, and she could use a teacher who understands how the game is really played." And so began the most unlikely partnership in the history of Westeros. Arya Stark and Tyrion Lannister, the wolf and the lion, riding together toward King's Landing with purposes that aligned despite being born of completely different loyalties. It was an alliance that made no sense by the normal rules of the world, but these were not normal times, and the game they were entering had no normal rules. During the journey south, Tyrion became Arya's teacher in ways that no scepter or maester could ever have been. He taught her to read faces like books, to recognize the tells that revealed when someone was lying or afraid or angry. He showed her how to listen to conversations from 3 tables away in a crowded inn, how to ask questions that seemed innocent but revealed dangerous truths, how to blend into crowds and shadows until she became effectively invisible. "The first rule of survival in King's Landing," he told her as they approached the city's massive walls, "is that everyone is playing the game, even when they claim they're not. The second rule is that the game never stops, even when it looks like peace. And the third rule, the most important one, is that the moment you stop learning, you start dying. King's Landing hit Arya like a physical blow. The stench of 500,000 people living too close together, the noise of commerce and politics and human ambition grinding against itself like millstones, the sheer overwhelming size of it all. Nothing could have prepared her for the reality of the capital. But within days, she began to adapt with the resilience that had always been her greatest strength. In the Red Keep, she became something that had never existed before, a ghost who served no master but family loyalty. Using the skills Tyrion had, taught her and the natural advantages of being small, young and underestimated, she learned to slip through corridors and passages that even long-time residents didn't know existed. She discovered that the Red Keep was honeycombed with secret ways, built by paranoid kings and clever servants over centuries of intrigue. She learned to listen at doors and windows, to read the secrets written in glances and gestures, to piece together conspiracies from scraps of overheard conversation like a maester studying ancient texts. What she discovered should have terrified a girl her age, but instead of fear, she felt the cold, focused anger that comes to wolves when their pack is threatened. Cersei and Jaime's twisted love affair, conducted in shadows and stolen moments, that left evidence in looks and touches that others missed. Joffrey's casual cruelty, already legendary among the servants who cleaned up after his games, and the guards who pretended not to see his victims. Varys moving through the castle like silk-wrapped steel, gathering secrets and trading information with a network of spies that reached into every corner of the realm. But it was the web of debts and hatreds and promises that stretched through every noble house that truly opened her eyes to the scope of the game being played around her father. Lords who smiled at feasts while planning betrayals, merchants who supplied information along with goods, servants who had been bought and sold like any other commodity. The night before everything fell apart, Arya finally made her way to the Tower of the Hand, Her father was alone in his solar, bent over letters and ledgers in the light of guttering candles, trying to solve puzzles with honor when what he needed was cynicism and cunning. He looked older than she remembered, worn down by the weight of responsibilities he had never wanted and secrets that were eating him alive from the inside. "Father," she said, stepping out of the shadows like a spirit materializing from the very stones. Ned Stark looked up, and for a moment she saw him as others did, tired, aging before his time, carrying burdens that bent his shoulders like invisible stones. Then his face lit with joy and wonder, and the kind of love that made all the political games seem small and petty by comparison. "Arya? Sweet gods, how did you... What are you doing here? How is this possible?" She told him everything, speaking in the careful, precise way she had learned from watching Tyrion present arguments to skeptical audiences. The list from the Eyrie, the assassination plot, the whispered conversations she had overheard in the Red Keep's hidden passages. She watched his face change as the pieces fell into place, honor warring with the terrible necessity of survival, duty struggling against the instinct to protect his family at any cost. "You're certain of all this?" Ned asked when she finished, his voice heavy with the weight of implications that stretched far beyond anything he had imagined when he rode south to serve his king. "As certain as winter coming," Arya replied, using the words of their house with deliberate emphasis. Ned Stark sat in silence for a long time, staring at the letter he had been writing, his resignation as hand, his request to return north with his daughters, his attempt to escape the game with honor intact. Finally, slowly, he crumpled the parchment and threw it into the fire, watching his noble intentions burn like kindling. "Then we play," he said quietly. "Gods forgive me, but if the only way to protect my family is to become like them, then that's what I'll do." The next morning, when Robert Baratheon died from wounds suffered while hunting boar, wounds that everyone assumed were accidental, but that Arya now suspected might have been helped along by Lannister gold and careful planning, Ned Stark was ready. Instead of the honorable fool that Cersei and Joffrey expected to deal with, they found themselves facing a player who had learned the rules of their game and was prepared to use them. When Joffrey claimed the Iron Throne, when Cersei moved to consolidate power, when the gold cloaks prepared to arrest the former hand of the king, they found empty chambers and cold hearths. Ned Stark had vanished into the city's depths like smoke dissipating in wind, taking with him proof of Joffrey's parentage, detailed records of Lannister crimes, and the loyalty of men who had learned that sometimes the wolf's honor could be more flexible than its enemies assumed. The war that followed was unlike anything the Seven Kingdoms had seen before. Instead of the straightforward rebellion that might have erupted after an honorable lord's execution, the realm found itself caught in a web of espionage, assassination, and political maneuvering that made traditional battlefields seem simple. By comparison, Ned Stark moved through King's Landing like a ghost, gathering allies among the merchants and craftsmen and common folk who had grown tired of Lannister arrogance. Arya became his eyes and ears in the Red Keep, slipping through passages and chambers like a shadow, carrying messages and secrets between conspirators who were slowly strangling the new regime from within. The North rose slowly, carefully, while their lord gathered evidence and allies in the shadows of the capital. Robb Stark became not just a king, but a spy master, coordinating with his father's network in King's Landing to plan moves and countermoves on a board that stretched from the Wall to Dawn. Months passed in a deadly dance of move and countermove, with Arya at the center of it all. She learned to wear faces that weren't quite her own, not through magic, but through the more subtle art of becoming whoever people expected to see. A serving girl carrying wine, a page delivering messages, a young noble's daughter visiting cousins. Each role required different mannerisms, different ways of speaking, different ways of moving through the world. she discovered that the most dangerous weapon in King's Landing wasn't a sword, but information deployed at exactly the right moment, to exactly the right person. A whispered word could topple a lord, an intercepted letter could prevent a massacre, a careful lie could save a dozen lives. She learned to think 3 moves ahead, to see the patterns within patterns, to understand that every action created reactions that rippled outward like stones thrown into still water. The Lannisters, for all their gold and pride, found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't see or strike at directly. Their messages were intercepted, their plans leaked to their enemies, their allies slowly peeled away by offers that mixed generosity with subtle threats. Cersei grew paranoid, suspecting everyone around her, while Joffrey's cruelty became more. Erratic as his hold on power weakened, Arya watched it all, learned from it all, became shaped by it in ways that would have been impossible if she had fled to Braavos and learned the art of wearing dead faces. Instead of becoming no one, she became more herself than ever. Arya Stark of Winterfell, daughter of wolves, protector of pack, a girl who understood that sometimes the greatest victories came not from the edge of a blade, but from the careful application of truth at the perfect moment. When the final confrontation came, when all the pieces had moved into position and the endgame began, it happened not in the throne room with drawn swords, but in the Sept of Baelor, with documents that could not be denied and witnesses that could not be silenced. Ned Stark emerged from the shadows not as a prisoner, but as a prosecutor, armed with evidence that made Joffrey's illegitimacy impossible to deny and Cersei's crimes impossible to ignore. The realm that had teetered on the edge of chaos found itself faced with a choice: accept the truth and restore legitimate rule, or watch everything burn in a war that would make the Dance of Dragons look like a children's game. In the end, even the Lannisters' gold couldn't buy them enough allies to fight the combined forces of justice, armed with proof and northern honor, tempered by southern cunning. Years later, when chroniclers wrote the histories of this time, they would struggle to understand how a single decision, a mother's choice to keep her daughter home, had changed the fate of kingdoms. They would marvel at the transformation of Arya Stark, who might have become a faceless man-assassin in another world, but instead became something perhaps even more dangerous. A Stark who understood both honor and cunning, who could move in shadows while remaining true to the light. She never learned to change her face through magic, but she mastered the more subtle art of becoming whoever the situation required, while never forgetting who she truly was. She never wielded needle in the service of the many-faced god, but she learned to use truth and timing as weapons just as deadly as Valyrian steel. The girl who stayed home to protect her family ended up saving not just the Starks, but the entire realm from a war that would have drowned it in blood. She discovered that sometimes the greatest journey is the one that brings you home, and that staying can be the bravest choice of all, especially when staying means standing guard over everything you love while the world tries to tear it apart around you.